So yesterday I moved into my new place, which is pretty old. Online town records show that it was built in 1848. It's massive, 6,000 square feet, across 3 floors and a dungeon for a basement. It's an old New England mansion, originally for one family, then apparently converted into multiple units at one point, then back to one family again. A lot of strange construction work, walled-off doorways, a lot of space between the walls of the rooms. 2 staircases that lead to different sections of the basement, 3 going up to the 2nd floor. There's also another staircase that leads to a single room nestled between the 1st and 2nd floor in the center of the house. I'm staying here alone for a while as a favor for a friend. It's been empty for a while, as said friend seems to have underestimated renovation costs. Tried to paint a picture, now to the spooky. So last night, my first night alone in this maze of doors and stairways, I had my first paranormal experience. I had always been a believer, but never saw or felt anything unusual other than sleep paralysis. I'm on the back porch smoking the last cigarette of the night just after midnight. I come inside into the kitchen, walk over to the bathroom which is connected. Everything is neat, tidy, and in order. I retire to my bedroom, which is actually more like a massive dining room with a small entryway with a fireplace. It's important to note that I didn't go to sleep. I was binging Game of Thrones. At 2:30 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom again. I'm walking down the long hallway, and just before I make the sharp left turn into the kitchen, I hit the light switch and immediately jumped backwards and was washed over with chills and heart rate jumped straight to 150. Every single cabinet and drawer was fully opened. I stood there for a second, composed myself, and made a pathetic run across the kitchen for the bathroom. Again, just before entering, I hit the lights. Now my heart rate is about 200. The bath is the same as the kitchen. Every drawer and cabinet door and the vanity mirrors, this very large bathroom. Also, I quickly notice that the shower curtain is shut, concealing the shower. When I know it was fully open last time I was there. An old habit, closed curtain always freaked me out. I left everything as is and just went back to the room rather quickly. I hit the obligatory extra light switches on the way back, and I did not dare to explore in the dark. I sat upright in my bed all night staring at the doorway waiting for the sun to rise. While I waited, I enjoyed the sounds of a ceramic mug falling into the sink and bouncing around. Of course, nothing in the morning. Also, odd sounds from the basement directly beneath me, like a metal yard rake dragging on the stone floor, and sounds of things being moved around, but not a sound from the area of the kitchen. I asked my friend a little more about the house today without telling him about my experience. Apparently, it had been a very poorly operated sober house for a very long time, and had been shut down earlier in the year. I'm told of a number of overdose deaths over the years, and given the age of the house, who really knows what has happened here? About to begin night 2 alone here. Any similar experiences out there? What should I expect? Should I leave now, or wait to see if it's lonely and just being playful? I must have been around 4 or 5 years old. I don't remember my exact age, but this happened in the first house I lived in as a kid, so definitely around the very early 2000s. Couldn't have been older than 6. I didn't have my own room, so I would sleep with my parents on their bed. One of the reasons we ended up moving was because eventually I needed my own room, and this house only had 2 bedrooms, which was enough for my parents and older sister at the time. In my parents' bed, I used to sleep facing the wall, and I was pretty much cornered in by my mom. There was a little gap made by our bed and the wall. It wasn't big enough for me to roll to and fall down, but still a noticeable gap. I vividly remember one night when I woke up in the middle of the night. I was facing the wall, and I remember feeling like something was about to happen. Just pure dread and nervousness. I lay there just staring at the wall and the gap, scared for my life for whatever reason. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness as I lay there. Out of nowhere, a black, furry hand rose out of the gap between the bed and the wall and swayed back and forth like it was waving at me. The best visual representation of what this thing looked like would be the Grinch's hand, only black. It just swayed back and forth like it was saying hello to me, but in a very exaggerated way. It scared me to the core, and I started crying and screaming. My mom woke up, picked me up off the bed, and held me in her arms. Whenever I would cry, she would try and calm me down by walking around the house with me in her arms, showing me things to try and distract me and get me to stop crying. She walked me towards the kitchen and started showing me all the pots, pans, and dishes on the dish rack, whisper-talking to me to try and calm me down. Eventually I did calm down and she carried me back to bed. At this point, I was 100% awake and fully aware. She walked to the foot of the bed so we could both get on without disturbing and waking up my dad. As soon as she put me on the bed, I immediately saw the furry hand laying right next to my dad's legs, slightly twitching. My mom was trying to lead me to a spot of the bed, but I didn't want to move because this thing was on the bed and I didn't want to touch it or step on it. She was gently forcing me to walk on the bed and I made the effort to step over it. I tried to tell my mom that there was something next to my dad, but she was probably more concerned about going back to sleep after having woken her up in the middle of the night. She didn't understand what I was trying to tell her. I just lay there in my spot of the bed, facing away from the wall this time, trying not to move. I must have fallen asleep at some point because that's all I remember from this night. I'm 21 now, and I don't think I'll ever be able to logically explain what that thing was. I know for a fact that I was awake and not dreaming. I'm fully aware of sleep paralysis, and while it does sound like something someone might see during a sleep paralysis episode, it doesn't explain how I saw the thing on the bed when I was coming back into the room. I'm really curious if anyone else has had a similar experience like this or knows someone that has. There's tons of people who have had paranormal experiences with ghosts and shadow people, but I've never heard of anyone experiencing what I did. Back in 2001, I was 6 years old. I grew up in a remote town in far north Queensland, Australia. I knew this boy a year younger than me called Jason. He was the youngest and only boy out of 4 siblings, while his parents were very much lower-class bogans, aka white trash. On a regular basis, the children were neglected, which could have been a contributing factor in Jason's death. Jason's family were staying at a relative's house on the outskirts of some town near a construction site. When no one was watching him, Jason went to the construction site where an accident occurred, and Jason was crushed to death by a large tire. Back at our primary school, there was Memorial Day held for Jason, and because of my age, I was totally oblivious to what had actually happened and had no concept of death. The main things I remember from that day were parents and teachers crying, the planting of the palm tree, prayers, and the tree getting blessed. A few days later, I was waiting to get picked up from school and I saw Jason walking around the place. There was none of that transparent business. He looked solid and normal. I asked him where he had been, and he looked at me, then ran behind a tree. I looked behind the tree and he was gone. Later he was back again, but further away, walking off somewhere, so I stayed waiting for someone to drive me home. My mother ended up inviting Jason's family to our house. While the sisters and mother were there, Jason kept hanging around them, then disappearing over and over again. My brother kept telling me to stop staring at the family. I said I was looking at Jason, who then poked his head out from behind his mother and poked his tongue out at me. I thought that he was playing, so I chased him and ran around the couch. By the time I got to the other side, he was gone again. This is when things really hit the fan because I turned to Jason's mother and said, "Where's Jason?" The mother burst into tears. The sisters started swearing at me. My mother scolded me. My sisters looked shocked and my brother was trying not to laugh at everyone's reaction. The last time I saw Jason, my mother and I were at the shop when Jason's mother was walking past and Jason was running behind her. Years later, after I graduated from boarding school and I was living away from home, I went back to my hometown and went to my old school. I actually forgot why a random palm tree was growing on the grounds of the year 1 and 2 block until my younger cousin told me it was put there for some dead kid. The palm tree is a dwarf palm tree that grows up near a wash-up sink in the playground. It's a pretty lame place to put it, yet it looks like it's thriving. Cryptozoology is the study of unknown animals along with plants that have not yet been accepted by science to exist or be real. In some cases, cryptozoologists research accounts involving large carnivorous plants consuming animals and even human beings. What would one do if encountering a tree starving for human blood spawned not from nature, but by supernatural forces? In Japan, legends warn of such a vampiric plant called the jaboko. Japanese folklore labeled demons, monsters, spirits, and other malevolent forces as yokai. A few of these supernatural entities resulted in a human, animal, or even a household transforming after experiencing some traumatic or violent event. Not surprising to discover legends about plants manifesting into yokai that feed upon humans like the jaboko. In myth, this creature was once a tree within a battlefield whose roots absorbed vast amounts of blood soaked in the soil from the dead warriors, giving birth to a monster. Jaboko appears as any other ordinary tree in the forest waiting for an unsuspecting victim. Only the few observant may be warned to the unusual jagged branches or the several bones poking through the roots. Many fail to notice these features and fall victim to the tree once close enough. The branches would grab the prey and hoist them to the center of the tree. The victim would have their veins and arteries stabbed by the branches as Jaboko sucks out all the blood. The corpse would either remain hanging or lowered to the ground for animals and other scavengers to feed until the bones littered around the roots. Often, Jaboko thirsts for human blood, but will consume large animals when people are not around. Many Japanese legends of yokai will refer to ways of defeating them. Jaboko may be a demon, but it still has the same vulnerabilities of a plant. Some stories told of chopping the tree down while fighting off its branches or setting fire to it until ashes remained. Just a note, myths mention a jaboko branch can heal wounds and even cure ailments. My mom grew up in a small town in Mexico where everyone pretty much knows each other. I believe the population was around 350 at the time of the 80s. Around the time of the events, she was 10 years old. I don't know if it runs in the family, but at some time in our life, every single member of my family has experienced something paranormal. Well, here are some of my mom's stories I think are worth telling. She lived in a small adobe house. It was a super small home for the 5 of them, my grandparents, my uncle, my aunt, and my mom. The kitchen was located on the front part of the house, and the rooms were on the back. There was a wall that divided the kitchen from the rest of the house, and to get to either, there was a door inside the house, kind of how some hotel rooms have a door to get to the other room. Well, that was their house. They also had a window in one of the rooms that they could see to the kitchen. The kids would sleep in one room and my grandparents in the other one. Where my mom and my aunt and my uncle would sleep was the room with the window. My mom tells me that at night they would hear the chairs from the kitchen being dragged, and all the things on the table would get smacked off the table. On one occasion, the noises were very loud. It woke her and her siblings up, and they were curious. Although they knew what was making the noise, they looked through the window, and they saw a small shadow dragging a chair across the room. She said they ran to their parents' room and slept the night there. The noises went on all night, she recalls. They believed it was my great-great-grandma's dad that would mess around with them because he lived in that house before it was passed on to my grandmother. Another time she said she awoke during the night and she looked to the side of the bed where she saw a big black dog with red eyes. She went under the blanket and didn't come out until the morning. She always believed she saw the devil in the shape of a dog. She also saw what looked like a monkey hanging and swinging from the door of her room. Those were only a few stories I remember her telling me. Now for some of my stories. It was Thanksgiving 2006. We had dinner with the family. I was 12 years old. I got mad at my mom because I wanted to go to the mall for Black Friday with her and my aunt, and she said no, so I left my room. Me and my little sister shared a room. The room was small. We had a bunk bed, those metal bunk beds that make a lot of noise when you move and turn. Well, I was watching Chicken Little. It was probably 12 a.m. once the movie finished. I turned off the light and tried to sleep. As I was lying down facing the wall, I had my eyes closed trying to go to sleep, when the bed started creaking like somebody had laid down, someone really heavy. I turned around and the empty side of the mattress was sinking down like someone was laying down. I freaked out but couldn't move. I tried to scream and I couldn't. I was so scared I started to cry. I closed my eyes really tight and I let out the loudest scream. My little sister and cousin came into the room and turned the light on. My sister hugged me and I told them what happened. When they turned the light on, you could see the bed sheets were all messed up like someone was laying there. That was definitely one experience that stuck with me. Throughout my life, I've had experiences with the paranormal, usually just seeing shadows and hearing steps or someone trying to open the doors. Back in Mexico, we had my aunt and uncle and my mom's siblings stay over at our home when they came to visit here to the United States. I remember one occasion my aunt told my sister that if she didn't behave, la mano peluda, the hairy hand, will come and get her. She freaked my sister out. At night, my aunt said that she was awoken by tapping and heard tapping followed by 3 knocks on our room's door. She believes that happened to her because she was trying to scare my little sister. A year ago, I met my current boyfriend and things were going great. I had met his mom, but had yet to meet his brother, Sean, and his brother's girlfriend, Kira. Fast forward to Thanksgiving weekend, and my boyfriend called me frantic with a shaking voice and began telling me that there was a terrible accident on the highway between his hometown and the next town to the east. That accident had involved his brother's girlfriend, Kira. She was DOA. Over the next month, we spent a lot of time in this small town supporting his brother, helping any way we could. We didn't know how to help him deal with this. Hey, we didn't know how to deal with it ourselves. After she passed away, as a celebration of life, Sean and her parents chose an oak tree sapling to plant on the property that my boyfriend and Sean's family owns. We call this her spot, and have built a small fence around the tree to mark it off in the winter months and have a bench nearby so we can sit with a small fire pit about 10 feet away. Jump to this weekend. I was compelled randomly to go walk to Kira's spot and have a seat. I sat and began talking out loud, asking her if she was near and could hear and so on. I began thanking her for being the person she was, despite us never crossing paths when she was alive. I told her I missed her, that we all do. I asked her to help us help Sean as he continues almost a year later to deal with the loss of the love of his life. I sat in silence for a few moments before saying my goodbyes and began walking back to where my boyfriend was doing some work. As I reached about 10 feet away, I heard someone say, "Wait," and I felt the rush of warmth around me, and I was overwhelmed with a feeling of love and gratitude. I don't know what to make of this, but I believe that this was Kira thanking me for taking care of the people she loved so much in her absence. Over a year ago now, my auntie and uncle were on holiday when completely out of the blue, my uncle had a heart attack and dropped dead. I was fairly close with him, but not enough to be very emotionally distressed. My auntie now lives alone, aside from her dog and cat, in a pretty big house which I'm often asked to look after for weeks at a time while she travels with friends. Now, I'd done this plenty of times before my uncle had passed, but I think my auntie was concerned that I would be too upset to stay there alone after what happened. I told her it was fine, and I've stayed there about 6 times in the last year. But I'm noticing a pattern. I'm 18 and I've struggled with poor mental health on and off for the past 3 to 4 years, usually nothing very major. However, when I stay in this house, it's as if all my negative emotions are amplified significantly. I always feel extremely depressed and lethargic. I have very negative thoughts towards my life and my future. Some days I'm on the brink of tears for hours on end for no reason. It's nothing special, but I thought I'd share. I don't really consider myself a believer in the paranormal, but I could almost feel a negative energy clinging to what is otherwise a really nice family house. It's starting to make me not enjoy staying there. And my question is, can a house harbor negative emotions? This happened specifically to my mom and aunt when they were little. They lived in a small place out in the country in Norway, which is the exact place I also live in. In this small place, everyone knew each other. It was kind of a small village. One evening, my aunt and mom had gone for a walk outside. They lived on a hilltop and had to walk downhill first. They walked their trip to the end of the hill and followed the road a while. When they walked back and almost reached the place where it was going uphill to their house, they saw a man in the distance. He walked slow but still somehow reached them before they went up to their house. It was a man their parents knew very well. They were good friends and he often visited them. His name was John. My mom and aunt said hi to him, but they didn't get an answer. He didn't even look at them, just stared empty out into the air. His skin was white. My mom and aunt became a little freaked out and began to run up the hill to their house. When they walked inside, and before my mom and aunt even got to say anything, my grandmother and their mom said, "Did you hear? John is dead. We got a phone call from his wife." Now my mom and aunt were even more freaked out. They didn't dare to tell the others, and they've kept on that secret until they became adults. And I've at least been told the story of when they met a dead man. Let me start by explaining the environment I grew up in. I grew up in a wooded area on a gravel road with houses pretty distant from each other. Now let me also start by saying that my dad has told me pretty creepy stories about this road that he grew up on. My mom and dad split up and I've stayed living with my mom and my stepdad on that road. We lived by a graveyard just right up the hill from us, about 40 yards. I was about age 8 at this time. We were all sleeping in the living room floor, my mom, my 2 brothers, and myself. My older brother was sleeping in his room, and my stepdad was sleeping in their room. Why exactly we were sleeping on the living room floor, I don't quite remember. But here it's about 1 a.m. in the morning. I suddenly wake up, not by a noise, not by a person, just naturally. When I wake up, there are hundreds of ghost-like apparitions hovering in the air, like they all had a picture frame they could make movement in. None of them were very large, just all miniature-sized ghost-like shapes about 1 foot and 1.5 feet tall, but in the air. I didn't feel afraid. I proceeded to just stare at them as they stay for several minutes, but it felt like hours. I remember seeing a boat, a very large boat, that some ghosts were on. Why, I'm not sure, but some of those graves are from the 1840s. Also, a very important part to add is where our trailer was, my great-grandpa said that people from the war were buried there, and that African-American people were hung up on the hill by the graveyard that was fenced off between the graveyard and where they supposedly got hung. Through our yard is where Civil War soldiers used to frequent through, which Fort Benton is literally not even half a mile from my house. Now back to it, I remember seeing the ship and quite a bit of people on it. I just stared and watched their every move, but didn't hear a sound. I then wake up my mom, and I must have woken her up quite loudly as my other brothers laying on the floor woke up as well. And this is where it gets interesting. No one seemed scared, just all speechless. My mom didn't even wake up my stepdad, she just instantly picked up the phone. She called her closest neighbor who was very religious and asked her if she would come up. Why my mom chose to have her, I have no idea. Our neighbor came over and it was the craziest thing. All the ghosts were still there, like nothing scared them away, which is rare in most ghost sightings. So by this point it had been at least 30 minutes that these ghosts have just been in suspension there. Our neighbor proceeds to open the Bible. We were all very religious family. As I sit and watched her, she began speaking in tongues out of this Bible. Eyes closed, one arm up, and speaking away. After about 5 minutes, they all disappeared at once. Just poof, gone into thin air. My stepdad also informed me that where we currently live, a house was previously built there that had been burned down, with an entire family stuck inside. Their bodies and remains buried in our backyard. I was about 18 years old and rented a room off some woman in her late 20s. The problem is that she seemed normal at first. It wasn't until weeks later she proved to be insane. I usually see myself as pretty accepting, so when she told me that she was a witch and spent every full moon running around a mountain naked with her coven, I didn't care. What did bother me was the fact that she stole off of me, constantly tried to cause a conflict, killed my pet fish, started watching me sleep, like I would wake up to find her staring at me in the middle of the night. She thought I was trying to steal her partner off of her for no reason at all. So I noped out of there. The nutcase also started stalking me for a few weeks to the point I had to get the police involved. When I moved into my new place, I usually slept with the lights off, but the light from under the door would still shine in, outlining stuff. That's when I could see some type of humanoid outline in the far corner of the room. Over the course of the weeks, it moved closer and closer to the bed, to the point I could see it look somewhat feminine. I also started developing a ridiculous amount of scratches all over my body, including parts of my back and neck I couldn't physically reach myself. A few times in the night I would wake up where I couldn't breathe, and it felt like someone was actually choking me for a split second. I also woke up with the woman thing standing above me, smiling when this happened. I verbally told it off one night, and the last time I saw it was the worst thing I had seen. I hadn't seen the thing for a week or so, and the scratches were fading. One night I rolled on my side while half asleep. I felt warm air blow into my face like someone was breathing on me. I didn't open my eyes until it happened again, but the breathing was harder. When I opened my eyes, I came face to face with this thing that looked like a dead woman that had been left to rot in a body of water or something. Her face was bloated with her skin being discolored, and her hair was slimy with clumps missing. She had her head angled up on her chin that was resting on the bed in my face while her body was actually lying under the bed. I screamed and she vanished. I was close to genuinely peeing my pants and was too scared to get off the bed until daybreak. People think that the nutcase cursed me, but I think the nutcase is too stupid for something like that. If she was the cause, I think it was by accident, like her messing with something she shouldn't, that caused it to attach itself to everyone around her. However, earlier this year I was working in a small town that had poor phone reception. When I was wandering around trying to get contact, I kept feeling like I was being watched and followed. Later, in an area where I was totally alone, I heard a woman laughing, and I immediately got chills. I went straight back to my hotel room and left all the lights on and turned on the television. I felt like someone was lurking around, but felt too scared to look around. I will never forget that putrid face. When I was 5 years old, my family moved from one state back to my home state. We had not purchased a home before the move. During the interim, while my parents were house hunting and my father was temporarily stationed close to Los Angeles, we stayed with my grandparents. We stayed in that house for 9 months. I met a little girl there, a spirit girl. My grandmother babysat for my little sister, age 3, my cousin, 4.5, my baby brother, 1, and myself, while my mother worked during the day. Usually we all took naps in the same spare bedroom. On that day, my cousin and sister were laughing and giggling. My grandmother chose to split us up so we could go to sleep. She put me in her bedroom on the queen-size bed alone. She left the other 3 kids in the spare room. Everyone fell asleep before me. As I lay there looking towards the hallway of the ranch-style home, I watched a little girl in a pretty plaid dress with rickrack on the bodice, Mary Janes and banana curls skipping up and down the hall from one end to the other. At one point she stopped skipping. She stood in the open doorway and said, "You can see me?" "Yes," I whispered, afraid of my grandma. She replied, "I will talk out loud. Answer me in your head. She can't hear you." She told me that her name was Emily. She said she liked to play dolls and ball with us. She liked my grandparents' dog. She talked for a few minutes. She told me that grandmother couldn't see her and that my grandfather did, but that he scared her. My grandmother was vacuuming in the den. When my grandmother finished vacuuming, she came down the hall to check on us, then left. Emily had disappeared while Grandma was in the hallway. I closed my eyes so Grandma would think I was asleep. When I reopened them, Emily was next to the bed. She said she would come to play sometimes, and I replied, okay. I never saw her again. Yes, I wondered if I was hallucinating or using my imagination. Years later, when we were sitting around after a holiday dinner, my grandfather was sharing creepy stories from his hometown. I asked him if he ever saw the little girl in the Los Angeles house. We talked about her for a while. Grandpa always wondered what she was doing there, how she had died, if he really saw her, or if he was going loopy. I told him about my encounter. He told me some great stories that night, and he shared stories about the abilities his family members had. He didn't doubt me, and I didn't doubt him. My grandpa told me this story over the weekend when they came up to visit my family. He's from a small town in Mexico where almost everyone owns acres of land where they grow wheat, barley, and corn. Well, the lands are located on the lower part of town. Since the town is located in a hill, you have the top part of town, the middle, and then the downside. It's mainly a dirt road with oak trees and mesquite trees, usually covering the acres. So my grandpa and his uncle had to go down to water the crops. They use water that comes down from the river to water it, and if they wanted to get the good water, they had to go at midnight. So my grandpa heads down, flashlight and machete on hand, walking down the dirt road. He said he was meeting his uncle down there. Once he got there, his uncle wasn't there yet, so he lied down in the grass waiting for his uncle in the water, looking up to the sky and the huge oak trees, when he said he heard something, and while looking up, he saw a shadow darker than the night. It stood out, he said. He said it was flying from one tree to the other, and every time he went to illuminate it, the flashlight wouldn't turn on. He said he saw it fly by like 4 times. When he heard steps, he got up really quickly, and it was his uncle. Uncle asked him if the water had come down yet, to which my grandpa replied no. Then he asked him if he had seen or heard anything weird, and my grandpa told him about what had just happened. That's when his uncle told him that when he was walking down the road, he saw a dark figure. He stared at it, and then the figure got bigger, and it took off flying down towards to where my grandpa was. They believed it was a witch in the form of a lechuza, an owl, since several people have reported it recently and seen it before. Growing up, I've dealt with what every child that comes from a military family has to deal with, constantly making new friends and losing friends because their parents, or my father, would move to a new station. This time we were leaving Arizona and once again going to Germany, but before I, my sisters, and my mother could join him, we had to stay in small-town Ohio with my grandparents while my father sought out either the right size accommodations off base while waiting for base housing to become available. This was the kind of town where everybody knew each other, the kind of town that had the corner store all the kids loved because they had all the best candies, and the owner was just the friendliest old gent you've ever met. The blink and you miss it kind of town. My grandparents' house was beautiful, huge, and old. I'm not entirely sure when it was built, but judging by the electrical outlets, light switches, narrow doorways, and old doors with the rustic doorknobs and keyholes, I'd say it was sometime in the late 40s to early 50s. It sat next to a creek that my cousins and I would often go play in and catch frogs to torment my sister with. I loved this house, except for 2 areas that I would avoid: the attic and the basement, with partial earthen floor, low ceiling, and single 40-watt light bulb to illuminate this one room. I went into the basement just once to check on the laundry for my grandmother and refused to go down there ever again. I wouldn't even go near the basement door. Both these areas just gave me the creeps. The vibes I got from them just put me on edge. I want to say it was just a child's overactive imagination and that my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I'd just be in denial of what I had witnessed in those areas of the house. My old sister and I slept in a bunk bed in the basement, and my mother and baby sister shared a bedroom down the hall that was adjacent to the staircase. Our little bedroom had its own bedroom, which in itself was a pretty sweet deal had it not been for the fact that the attic door was also in the bathroom. This door was unlike any other attic entrance I've ever seen. This was an actual door, child-sized and in the wall. When opened, it would creak on its hinges, and there was a hinged set of stairs that you lowered to climb up. This likely added to the creep factor as well. On a previous visit one Christmas, I had gone into the attic on a dare for my cousins. They told me that there were bats up there, yet had never been up there themselves. I was hesitant, but it was during the day and my cousins were right at the door, so I went in. Climbing up the stairs, I was cautiously looking around, not wanting any winged rats flying at me. And what did I see? A rather large attic that could easily be another bedroom, a few boxes, and my dad's archery set and a wooden chair. None of this could be considered out of the ordinary and definitely not scary. At this point, I'm willing to bet you thought I was going to say I saw the chair move. Nope. Or later in the story, say that I heard it moving. Nope. That was the only time the chair was worth mentioning. During our first few weeks, my mother had asked my sister and I if either of us had gone downstairs for something in the middle of the night. We hadn't. We had heard someone walking down the hall from our room down the stairs. She had called out our names and gotten no reply. She seemed to shrug it off and go with the old houses make noises explanation. That same night, my sister was in the bathroom brushing her teeth before bed. She said that it felt like someone was watching her from near the attic door. We both woke up later with that same feeling after hearing that familiar creaking from the attic door. Something was now looking at us from the doorway of the bathroom. We had both seen it, a shadow standing in the dark. We got out of there and into my mother's room, telling her we saw a ghost, when she groggily inquired as to why we were in her room and then begrudgingly making room for us in the bed. We see this a couple more times during our stay, but that was the only time we hightailed it to her room. The one time I had ventured into the basement, I'd been checking the laundry for my grandmother. The washing machine cycle was done, so I thought I'd transfer the laundry to the dryer. With an armful of damp clothes, I noticed movement near the wall around the earthen floor. I froze and looked directly at a shadow walking from one wall and into the next. It was bad enough I was uncomfortable in this basement, but after seeing this, that was enough to keep me out of this room. My sister and I shared our experiences with my grandparents, but they simply shrugged it off with the old house explanation and said that we were just making up stories to get attention. Then my mother chimed in with her experience, and this produced an argument that had us leaving and staying with the other grandparents for a time. Soon after, my father had sent for us and we were living in a beautiful 3-story house owned by our German landlord and his wife. Both had treated us like our own grandchildren and far better than our own blood. The only incident to report in this new house was a French nanny who got frustrated and gave up trying to teach us French because we just couldn't seem to get past their equivalent of yes without giggling. Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you enjoy this channel and wish to support it further, please feel free to support me on Patreon, where for $1 or more a month, you'll have access to all future narrations and other cool rewards. And be sure to send in your creepy stories and experiences to letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might just hear it in the next video. Thanks again, and I'll see you again soon.